for your banana. Love you.
What does the Bible say about smoking marijuana, smoking weed? Well, although the Bible, is the document, the Bible doesn't have the word marijuana in it, but bottom line, smoking marijuana for pleasure is wrong. Now, let's take a look and work through some of the points and arrive at our conclusion. So the first thing I'd like to say is that it is true, and some people say, yeah, but there's lots of drugs that affect your mind. It is true, there are many legal drugs that affect your mind. We have to understand, why would God ever want us to use a drug that would affect our mind? What God is interested in out of our lives is that we're able to serve Him, that holistically, that we can bring our lives to the table and serve God. And if our bodies are affected or we're in such pain that we really honestly can't focus on God and can't serve Him, then God understands why we would take a drug, a prescription drug, for example, that would affect our mind. And in that light, could marijuana be used medicinally in a way that would benefit people? I believe it certainly could. And so I'm not against marijuana as far as being used as a medicine, if it's genuinely used that way, to enable people to serve God. And that's the big key. Why would anybody want to take a mind-altering drug if it is a prescription drug? Hopefully, from God's perspective anyway, the only reason is so that they could be better able to serve God. And marijuana could certainly fall into that category.
Here's why I got angry sitting there. Because I bought a lie. All my Christian life, I was told that drinking beer meant I wasn't a good Christian, I didn't love Jesus enough, and didn't care about causing other people to stumble, and I had allowed myself to be imprisoned by people-made religious rules, and that's not in the Bible. Jesus never said it, and it's not true. See, the Bible is clear on drunkenness and intoxication. Very, very, very clear. Don't be a drunk, all right? But don't preach, come and see, and then hit me with you're a bad Christian if whatever comes next out of your mouth is your opinion and has nothing to do with Jesus and what He said or did. Just keep it to yourself. I don't want to hear it. How about this? I'm going to say this because I want to clear up a statement I made about 2 months ago, all right? Listen carefully to this, all right? Using medical marijuana doesn't make you a pothead or a bad person. I got a bunch of kids over in our special needs ministry. The oil is saving their life. I have a friend that just moved back from the East Coast of Colorado so that their baby's brain tumor won't give him seizures anymore. Now, I can't make blanket statements, all cases, all times, all people. Let's be honest, though. Most people who are smoking weed have nothing to do with their cancer, right? So you got to wade through that, but I'm not going to make a blanket statement about that. How about that? Drinking alcohol in moderation doesn't make you an addict or doesn't make you a bad Christian, and being a Christian doesn't mean you have to be a boring, weird, freaky person that doesn't have fun anymore. How about this, all right? I'm done with religion and stupid rules that somebody other than Jesus thought up for my own good. How about this? Come and see Jesus. He'll tell me how I'm going to live my life. That's enough. Screw the rest. Anybody want to live like that?
There could be new hope for the families of thousands of epileptic children who suffer from horrible seizures, and it comes in the form of something I don't think you'd ever guess about. Take a look.
It's okay, honey. Mommy's here.
Charlotte Figge was a little girl with an extreme form of epilepsy with really bad seizures. At her worst, she probably had 2 seizures an hour. So bad sometimes her heart stopped. But then her mother discovered hemp oil extract from the cannabis plant seemed to stop the seizures without the intoxicating effect of marijuana. She named her discovery Charlotte's Web after her daughter. Now, scientific clinical studies will soon begin to find out why this oil seems to be helping Charlotte and many other children. Please welcome Mom Paige Figge and Joel Stanley, who grows the plant and sells the extract in Colorado, where medical marijuana is legal. Yeah, you can clap. And I want to start this by saying nobody anywhere has ever advocated for children smoking marijuana. You must understand this. This is not what this is about. This is not about being high. This is about saving lives and making children more comfortable. So just understand that's not what we're talking about, because I know people will send in emails and say, you're talking. That's not what's happening. Okay? Okay.
Yes, this isn't something that is actually smoked by kids. This is not a story about kids smoking marijuana. This is a hemp extract that is made in a lab, good manufacturing practices followed, and it's given in measured doses.
And you, hemp is not legal, I'm told, in the U.S. Is that true?
It's a very gray area. In fact, the U.S. imports more industrial hemp than any country in the world, yet the products made for human consumption rest in a very gray area.
Right.
You know, you did, I think, what I have a 2.5-year-old, and I can't imagine what it would be like to watch your baby seize. And I think you did what any mother would do. You went and got something to cure your daughter. But it almost didn't happen. I mean, they were ready to give up on her. Tell me, how did you arrive at this point? Because I think any mother would want to learn how you found something to help your daughter.
They did give up on her. She was 5 years old, and she was do not resuscitate, wheelchair, end-of-life, hospice, feeding tube, oxygen, seizing every 30 minutes. So you're seeing a seizure. If you've ever seen an epileptic seizure, it can be life-threatening. We had nothing left to try pharmautically. And so I met Joel. We started the oil, and the research is out there. I did my research. This is an
Can you talk? People don't understand that this is their trials. Are there going to be more?
We are doing more trials, but the research is there it's decades old. It's a Schedule I substance. So it's very difficult to do the research. It'll stay a Schedule I because we can't do the research. But it's out there. I found out what I needed. He had bred the plant to be very high in cannabidiol, very low in THC. We turned it into an oil.
That too. I'm sorry. So that's the healing property was in there without anything
anything that makes you high.
Yes,
It's not a high.
This is non-psychoactive. These kids are not getting high. People really
getting high.
They're getting well.
Well, they're high on life because they're not seizing up every 7 minutes. They can actually go be kids. And why would anybody? I mean,
I know. But let me also ask you, because we talked about this before. How many, if my kid, heaven forbid, had seizures, and I knew that this was something that would help him, I would go anywhere. How many laws would I be breaking if I flew from New York to you and took that drug home to my baby?
You would be breaking at least a couple of laws. First, federal law, and then
because I'd be crossing state lines.
and then potentially state law. So it's very important that we all change these outdated laws. This is absolutely huge. These hemp products that we import millions of dollars worth every year are technically not legal. So these laws are very outdated, but there's an answer for it.
And part of it has to be, I would guess, changing the minds of the American Academy of Pediatrics, who so far are not recommending this, right? How do you deal with, because I think a lot of parents, they go to their pediatrician. So how do you bring along, we've talked about the need to change the laws, but how do you also bring along the old institutions, the doctors?
I think that the medical community wants to see more research. So do we. That's why we've teamed with doctors, researchers. That's why we're running clinical trials to understand why this is working. But research takes time, and for the thousands of patients on our waiting list for Charlotte's Web, they don't have time.
And we have one here, right?
You're talking about thousands of people whose children need this medicine, okay? The children need this medicine. Parents can gauge better what's going on with their kids and tell you. And I think as a physician, you're obligated to see if it works. If they are telling you that this is something they feel will work for their child, you're obligated. You're obligated, I feel, as a physician, to take care of business. And you were about to say,
and we have, we have someone here. You're in this position, right? That you have a son who's, you've described him as very medically frail, and you think this might help.
Yeah, I have a son, Oliver, who's 14 years old. Oliver has hundreds of seizures every day. We are losing him. He can't even sit up the way he was sitting up like that by himself. He gets slammed down by seizures constantly. He has regressed. He has lost skills. He's become even more medically frail. There is a medicine that's available that's helping hundreds of children, and we have not even been allowed to try it because of the state we live in. all people in this country, we're in the United States of America, all people in this country should have access to the same medical treatments, regardless of what state you live in. The government has the authority to make this happen. Any governor of any state, Governor Cuomo in New York State, has the authority to give emergency access to this medicine now.
We're gonna fix it.
Even in New York,
We're gonna,
with
believe me,
happening by 2016,
we're gonna fix it. We're gonna fix it, baby. We're gonna fix it because nobody, no mother should be in this position.
No.
Ever. So, thank you guys. I want to thank Joel Stanley and Paige Figge and Missy Miller. And we want to make it clear that legally The View cannot endorse this kind of therapy. Medical marijuana is still not legal in most states. But, as Whoopi Goldberg, I'm telling you, this is no joke. It's important. And there but for the grace of God go we all. So let's get this going in case somebody in our family finds that they need it. We'll be right back.
My name is Danny Daniels. I'm a pastor in Lindsay, Oklahoma. Teresa Moran was here a few minutes ago, and her niece that she spoke out fighting brain cancer is a member of my church. I'm a Republican conservative who supports the passage of cannabis.
Finally!
When I found out that cannabis helps fight and cure cancer and helps alleviate seizures from Dravet syndrome, I was on board all the way. Jesus said, if you do it under the least of these, you do it under me. And if you don't do it under the least of these, you didn't do it under me. And if we want to truly be Christians in Oklahoma, Bible Belt, Amen. We have to have compassion. We have to be willing to put people, children, the sick before our own preconceived wrong ideas about something that's been propagandized for 70 years. And we have to give people the option to explore every avenue to treat their sickness. If we don't, we're not Christians, and we don't love people.
He is 14 years old, significantly handicapped, and he is addicted to benzodiazepines and barbiturates. He's 14. We're going to sit still, okay? I'm Missy Miller. This is Oliver Miller. We're from Atlantic Beach, New York. Oliver had a stroke in utero, and as a result, he has what's called a brain stem injury. So he has a lot of very complex medical problems. Among them are seizures that do not respond like this. Okay. Okay. All right. You okay? Okay. All right. All right. Come back now. That's what we call a brain zap seizure.
Certain strains of marijuana have received international attention for curbing seizures in children. Oliver has not been able to access this form of treatment. His mother, Missy, was not alone in her fight. Within the last decade, there has been a major push from citizens and activists across the United States to legalize medical marijuana. With 22 states having legalized the drug for medicinal usage, the spotlight turned to New Yorkers who have rallied behind the Compassionate Care Act, which would eventually make New York the 23rd state to legalize medical marijuana.
There has been a tradition of medical marijuana in New York City under the radar for 25 years. And now we are this close to bringing it above the radar. Don't drop this ball.
Earlier this year, Missy sat down with Elite Daily to discuss her frustrations with the current New York political system and her fear of losing her son.
You know, you can talk politics, you can talk money. The bottom line is, you can help people, you can save lives, you can give people better quality of life. It's what should be done.
The federal government regulates marijuana as a Schedule I drug. Now, Schedule I drugs are drugs that have no medical benefit and that are often highly addictive. So you're talking about classing it in a class with heroin. It is classified at a higher, more intense level than things like methamphetamine, which is a Schedule II drug.
you know, there are some questionable motives with the government that are going to be brought up and addressed. And I think within 5-7 years, it will all be legal federally on a medical level. My problem is Oliver doesn't have 5 years. I don't know that Oliver has 1 year.
Over the next few months, Missy rallied together with other parents whose children were also in need of help. They urged local politicians to meet their children to understand the importance of passing the bill. Missy turned her attention to New York Senator Dean Skelos, who represents her district, even launching a local commercial campaign.
Senator Skelos, please don't make us wait another year. Allow a vote on the Compassionate Care Act.
She continued her fight up to Albany, leading up to the big decision on June 19th.
Medical marijuana has the capacity to do a lot of good for a lot of people who are in pain and who are suffering.
We were in Albany Wednesday and Thursday. We heard Thursday morning that they had reached an agreement with the governor, and then we were in the press conference when the governor made the announcement that he was going to be approving this bill.
Some of these cases are the most heart-wrenching cases you've ever heard. You're dealing with children with epilepsy, babies.
The next day, I had gotten a phone call very early in the morning from Senator Skelos' office asking me if I was still in Albany. And I said, no, we had to come home. Oliver was having too many seizures. He was too unstable. And then they called back and they said, he would like you to watch the vote.
If you were to tell me at the beginning of this session that I would be voting yes on this legislation, I would say to you, no way.
And then when he said,
but when you meet Oliver Miller from my district, 14 years old, and some of the folks here mentioned that they have 10, 12 seizures a day, he has hundreds of seizures a day because as a result of a pre-birth stroke.
Calling out my son's name, like, on the Senate floor. Like, he basically, you know, was just saying, like, you know what, this little boy changed my mind.
That's worth voting for this legislation.
I was so proud of Oliver because I felt like Oliver is helping thousands of people.
The bill is passed.
Governor Cuomo signed the measure into law Saturday, July 5th, and held a formal signing ceremony in New York City on July 7th to highlight the new law.
It makes total sense for New York State to take this advancement in medical marijuana.
A tremendous weight has been lifted. This step has lifted, you know, the biggest hurdle right out of the way. So I'm very hopeful. But a lot of people look at Oliver or children like Oliver and think, you know, what do they contribute? You know, why they're here with all these problems? What do they? And Oliver really has contributed. Okay, all right, okay. And hopefully we can stop these. Okay, babe.
At one time, we had probably the largest prison ministry in America with CBN, and we did it with video, and the response was huge. Those men and women want to know the Lord, but there's something else we've got to recognize. We're locking up people that take a couple of puffs of marijuana, and the next thing you know, they got 10 years. They've got mandatory sentences, and these judges just say, they throw up their hands and say, there's nothing we can do. There's mandatory sentences. We've got to take a look at what we're considering crimes, and that's one of them. I mean, I'm not exactly for the use of drugs. Don't get me wrong, but I just believe that criminalizing marijuana, criminalizing the possession of a few ounces of pot and that kind of thing, I mean, it's costing us a fortune, and it's ruining young people. Young people go into prisons, they come out, they go in as youths, and they come out as hardened criminals, and that's not a good thing.
Exactly.
I'm pleased that the Bible Ministry exhibition of a church in China
will visit the United States again. I recall the opening of the first exhibition in Atlanta, which was very impressive. I attended the opening ceremony with Christian brothers and sisters from China, and we worshiped God and prayed together. I was touched to see how deeply and widely the Word of God is spreading in China, how fervent the hearts of Chinese Christians are toward the Bible, and how vigorous and vital Chinese churches are. We Christians, both American and Chinese, worship the same God, believe in the same Savior, and read the same Bible. In recent years, Bible ministries of the Chinese church have been making great advances. As of the end of 2010, more than 55 million Bibles have been published and delivered. There are already more than 56,000 churches and meeting points in China, and more are developing. Day by day, the Lord adds to the number of those who are being saved through China's churches, and the number of Christians in China has increased to more than 23 million. I praise God for the growth of the Chinese church and pray for the ministry of the China Christian Council and Three Self Patriotic Movement. This Bible ministry exhibition gives us an opportunity to learn more about its growth and brings to us the greetings of our Chinese brothers and sisters. It not only helps us better understand the evolution of Christianity in China, but also the development of Chinese society. I believe that the exhibit will promote fellowship between American and Chinese churches and will promote understanding and friendship between our citizens.
When I was president in 1979, I made my definitive speech about drugs, and I called for the decriminalization of marijuana. This was in 1979. Not for the legalization, but for the decriminalization, to keep people from being put in prison just because they were smoking a marijuana cigarette. And I pointed out that nobody should be punished worse for smoking a cigarette than a cigarette would be to them if they smoked it. But now we have, for every person who was in prison when I went out of office in 1981, there are 8 Americans now in prison. And most of those Americans who are in prison, and most of those Americans who are executed with a death penalty, are African American or Hispanic or other minorities, and also people who have a mental problem. You cannot imagine a white male man who has money being executed. So the death penalty in America and putting everybody in prison because they have marijuana is a very major step backward, and it ought to be reversed, not only in America, but around the world.
What do you make of the legalization of marijuana and the states that have legalized marijuana?
I'm in favor of it. I think it's okay. I don't think it's going to happen in Georgia yet, but I think we can watch and see what happens in the state of Washington, for instance, around Seattle, and let the American government and let the American people see, does it cause a serious problem or not? All drugs were decriminalized in Portugal about 10 years ago, and the use of drugs has gone down dramatically, and nobody's been put in prison. So I think a few places around the world are good to experiment with, and also just a few states in America are good to take the initiative and try something out. That's the way our country has developed over the last 200 years, is by a few states being kind of experiment stations. So on that basis, I'm in favor of it.
Look, you've pioneered on this. You say, I used to believe what the main feeling is out there. I've changed my mind. I've done the work. You're now doing a second documentary. What is the fundamental problem here?
Well, in terms of what we know, I think that there's a very interesting fundamental problem, and that is that if you look at the context of the United States, marijuana is considered a Schedule I substance, which puts it in the category of the most dangerous substances that has no medicinal benefit. Now, whether you agree with that or not, a lot of people don't agree with that, but it has real ramifications for the research that's done in this country. It's very hard to get research approved when it's a Schedule I substance because it's already preordained to not have any medicinal benefit. 94% of the studies in this country that I reviewed looked specifically for harm, not for benefit. So you get a distorted picture, and that's part of the problem. But I think that starts to have an impact on the way people actually think about this substance as well. Very different than in other countries. You have a medication out there right now to help treat MS, for example, very tough thing to treat. It's approved in 25 countries, Chris, not the United States.
Can medical marijuana treat things that other things cannot and treat things that we need treated?
Yes. The answer is yes. With marijuana, what seems to happen, and this is interesting, it both has an anti-inflammatory effect, but it also seems to dissociate people from the pain. So my arm really hurts, but you get the pain quality benefit, but you also get this dissociation. I'm not as emotionally attached to that pain, whatever it may be. But it seems to either decrease people's need for narcotic medications or eliminate that need altogether.
Have you changed your views of marijuana? I have. I grew up like most of my generation believing that marijuana was, something Satan was throwing at Americans and a communist plot. But I think most of us have come around to the belief that marijuana is hugely beneficial when used correctly for medicinal purposes.
They were constituents seeking medicinal use of marijuana to help their children who suffer from seizures and epilepsy. Then there's been numerous other people who want to decriminalize it or completely repeal the prohibition. I've got strong support, although there are some angry people and upset people, but I think we're at a tipping point, and I've received, at least from those who've contacted me, overwhelming support for the bill. And the difference of the bill between other states is that this does not create any bureaucracy. It doesn't create any regulation as a sin tax. It's not necessarily a sin. You can eat too much food and not please God and be a glutton. You can drink too much wine and be a drunkard, but God doesn't do away with the food or wine. He just condemns those excesses. And so my bill would simply repeal the prohibition for every cannabis marijuana statute in Texas. And it mainly refers to it as marijuana only, I think. Anyway, that's what I would call it. Well, we don't have regulations on coffee or caffeine products, and they're very addictive. I allow my children in their teens to drink coffee, but I don't allow them when they're young, and I only allow it a little bit while they're still in puberty. But I drink it in front of them. I teach them about moderation and how it can be addictive and how it can cause a severe headache if you withdraw from it. And I think that's the approach that we need to take to this. Remember, it's a plant that God made and that He didn't make a mistake with it that government needs to fix. We just need to use it responsibly. We can use the hemp for making paper or rope. We can use its oil for some people. We can use the marijuana with the THC in it for treating PTSD of veterans, whom we have 22 a day committing suicide. It could provide some calming influence, and it could help people perhaps with cancer. But you know what we got to learn to do is respect each other's liberty. We got to love not just my liberty, but my neighbor's liberty. And as long as they're not harming someone, government should not get in the way. That doesn't mean that they may be using something to excess, but sending them to prison or making it illicit just drives them to an underground culture and commerce. And what we need to do is lovingly engage them, be models to them, talk to them, be their friends, ask them to church. But not send them to prison as long as they're not harming their neighbor. Well, I encourage you to contact your elected officials and a lot of them know it's the right thing to do, but they're scared. It's been such a hot potato.
Oh, yeah.
It's always been hang 'em high. I mean, we're holding people more accountable for marijuana than we are for sexual assault and human smuggling. And we're putting much more resources to it, and it's just really sad.
Howdy, this is David Simpson, Texas State Representative from House District 7. Happy Independence Day. This is my first Texas and Liberty blogcast. It's entitled The Christian Case for Drug Law Reform. As a Christian, I recognize the innate goodness of everything God made and humanity's charge to be stewards of the same. In fact, it is for this reason that I'm especially cautious when it comes to laws banning plants. I don't believe that when God made marijuana, He made a mistake that government needs to fix. Regrettably, that is not the course we have pursued on more than one occasion. In the name of protecting the public, certain substances have been declared evil and contraband. So evil are these substances that state and federal agents are empowered to enforce laws with little or no regard for constitutional protections of individual rights, the sanctity of one's home, or the right to travel freely. You would think that our country's history with alcohol prohibition, an era marked by bootlegging, organized crime, government corruption, and a rise in crime in general, would have prevented us from making the same mistake again. But our current war on drug policies, though well-intended, have accomplished the exact opposite, spurring a proliferation of ever-changing exotic designer drugs and disregard for constitutional protections in the name of eliminating drugs at any cost. Just think of no-knock warrants, stop and frisk, civil asset forfeiture, and billionaire drug lords. The time has come for a thoughtful discussion of the prudence of the prohibition approach to drug abuse, the impact of prohibition enforcement on constitutionally protected liberties, and the responsibilities that individuals must take for their own actions. The Bible warns about excessive drinking, eating, and sleeping in Proverbs 23:21, but it doesn't ban the activities or the substances or conditions associated with them, alcohol, food, and fatigue. Elsewhere, feasting and wine are recognized as blessings from God. Scripture stresses respect for our neighbor's liberty and conscience, moderation for all, and abstinence for some. Should we be concerned for our friends and neighbors who abuse a substance or activity? Yes, we should help them through sincere and voluntary engagement, but not with force and violence. Is there a place for prohibition? Yes, a prohibition of aggression. See Romans 13. Our laws should prohibit and penalize violent acts. This is the jurisdiction of the magistrates under the new covenant. Harm to one's neighbor. Civil government should value everything God made and leave people alone unless they meddle with their neighbor. This is David Simpson for Texas and Liberty.
We're interested to know, tell us about your personal faith and what it means to your life.
I get to my God through Christ. Christ to me is a man of peace. He is for peace. He's not for war. He doesn't justify preemptive declared war. I strongly believe that there is a Christian doctrine of just war, and I believe this nation has drifted from that. No matter what the rationales are, we have drifted from that, and it's very, very dangerous, and I see in many ways being unchristian. And to justify what we do in the name of Christianity, I think is very dangerous and not part of what Christianity is all about. Christ came here for spiritual reasons, not secular war and boundaries and geography. And yet we are now dedicating so much of our aggressive activity in the name of God. But God, He is the Prince of Peace. That is what I see from my God, and through Christ, I vote for peace.
Talk to me about a little bit about your relationship with the Lord. In other words, I know it's a private matter, but how did you come to the Lord? You've talked about salvation before in Jesus Christ. What was that like for you, maybe back in the day, in terms of how you kind of processed it?
It's funny. It wasn't like that I can tell you there was one explicit second. I was raised in a Lutheran church, and it's a little bit different approach, but I remember that the most important event for me in my religious life was when we make a decision to go through catechism and become confirmed into the church. It was a big event for the family, and that was very clear. In the early years when I was in high school, you know, I went to several of the rallies with Billy Graham, and that had an effect on me too. Matter of fact, I was listening to one of his sermons the other day, and it brought back memories of having listened to him. And he brought up the subject of being born again. And I thought, well, I must have been listening to him back then, because he says it's different. He acknowledged it's different for different people. Sometimes it's an instantaneous event, and sometimes it's different. And he wasn't. You know, he described his understanding, but he was very open to an understanding of different people. And I thought, well, you know, maybe I listened to him as a teenager, making it so that, you know, we don't have to all say exactly how we have arrived at this point to accept Jesus as our Savior.
You know, up until 1937, smoking marijuana was legal. It was still stupid. It was legal, but all of a sudden we decided we were going to outlaw it. Well, nobody's outlawed marijuana. More people smoke it now than ever before. But some states, and I'm not familiar with this state, but some states have legalized the use of marijuana for medical reasons. You know, how compassionate, you know, how not compassionate could that be? Shouldn't people be allowed to make that choices? And as a physician, I can tell you there have been people dying with cancer. They can't hold their food down, and they're taking chemotherapy, and they get benefit. But we shouldn't be afraid of people making their own choices. But because marijuana is illegal, and because the plant looks a little bit like hemp, we're not allowed to raise hemp in this country. Hemp is a very, very good product, and if you want to get high on hemp, you have to smoke a cigarette as big as a phone pole. And yet, you know, they're hysterical about it. I mean, it's irrational. But hemp is a fantastic product. It makes better alcohol. I mean, it makes better ethanol than does corn. It makes clothes. It has all kinds of product. It was very helpful in World War II. And so many of these jobs now went to Canada. Canada takes the hemp, they raise the hemp, they make these products, and they sell them back to us. And then we wonder where our jobs are going. So I would say let's legalize hemp as well.
In the year 1985, the Food and Drug Administration approved a drug called Marinol, an oral synthetic form of THC, as a Schedule III controlled substance. Since then, using Marinol, unfortunately, is the only federally legal way to obtain the benefits of marijuana in the United States. Marinol's approval was a huge step forward for the cause of medical marijuana. In regards to Marinol, the United States Drug Enforcement Administration states in part that the FDA has not approved smoking marijuana for medicinal purposes, but has approved the active ingredient THC in the form of scientifically regulated Marinol. However, studies show that cannabis has fewer side effects than Marinol. Because the natural form of cannabis contains many more cannabinoids in addition to THC, it is much more effective than Marinol, which only contains one of the compounds that can be beneficial to patients. In addition, only a small percent of an oral dose of Marinol ever even reaches the bloodstream. Smoking of cannabis, however, can lead to a higher risk of bronchitis and other respiratory illnesses. This is why a process called vaporization is recommended over inhalation. Vaporization sends the cannabinoids directly to the bloodstream almost immediately, whereas it can take 4 to 5 hours for Marinol to effectively lessen symptoms. In addition, Marinol is very costly to make. Many doctors don't prescribe it to their patients because of its high cost, and insurance companies are often denying coverage for Marinol. We sat down with a medical marijuana patient in California who is prescribed Marinol.
My insurance did cover my Marinol for 5.5 years until my insurance company just decided to stop paying for it one day. And it's $14.50 a pill. You know, I don't have that kind of money.
Dr. Grinspoon says the problem is Marinol does not work as well as marijuana.
You take people who have used both herbal marijuana, smoked it or ingested it, and Marinol or dronabinol. Every time, never an exception. Oh, I much prefer herbal marijuana.
It was my experience when AIDS patients first started taking dronabinol back in 1992 that they didn't like it. The absorption when taken orally of THC is very variable and low.
The gut only absorbs 12%, plus or minus a few percent depending on the individual. The problem with taking it through the gut, you have to wait for an hour and a half to 2 hours to know whether you're getting relief from the pain or the nausea or whatever it is you're trying to relieve.
How does Marinol compare in all this? I was talking earlier. I mean, do you feel like it's as effective as the plant or no?
No. I do not believe Marinol is as effective as marijuana or THC.
And why do you say that?
I've never really seen it work. We've had it on, it's expensive, and I've never had a patient seem to get much benefit from it.
We really haven't had very much success with patients with Marinol for any side effect management. So there's something that is lost in with the THC in that processing.
Dr. Abrams says what's lost in the processing are all the other cannabinoids in the plant, some of which are known to mitigate the high associated with THC, making the patient feel more relaxed instead of anxious.
There are 400 other compounds in the plant, including 70 other sort of lookalikes to delta-9 THC, and those are all there for a reason.
Severe seizures, the situation seemed hopeless. It actually led Kim to an unexpected treatment for her 10-year-old son that even you thought you would never, ever, ever use. Tell us about it.
And that treatment is medical marijuana.
Mm-hmm. Did you get a lot of reactions like that when friends
I did,
heard about it?
absolutely. I was overwhelmed by it in the beginning. I mean, marijuana to my 10-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
So you had tried all types of different drugs. He even actually had brain surgery.
Mm-hmm.
And so you were out of options, out of all conventional options.
Mm-hmm.
And the irony of all of this is tell everyone what your husband does.
Well, my husband is a 26-year veteran of the Atlanta Police Department, and he is the drug guardian for keeping all of the seized drugs in the city.
He's in the narcotics division. Wow.
Yes.
Yeah.
So for you all, we're going to talk about that in a minute, but we want to show some of the changes that have been experienced. So let's show this, and Rachel can talk us through what we're seeing.
So the difference is remarkable. If you look on your left, this is Caden before he tried medical marijuana. And if you look on the right-hand side of the screen, this is Caden now. So it's almost like you have a brand new son. So talk to us a little bit about some of the changes that what can he do now that he couldn't do before you came up with this miraculous decision?
Well, this treatment has changed everything. I am getting to see my son and know my son for the first time. In 11, 11 yeah, 11.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it is. It's amazing. Some of the things that we experience with him that may seem small to other people, but you know, he couldn't land on the moon and it'd be bigger to us, is that we play ball with him now. I mean, and it's wonderful.
And I noticed too, he's no longer, he doesn't have to wear a helmet anymore. Have the seizures decreased?
Right now, we're working at an 85 to 90% reduction.
Oh, that's huge. That's so awesome. I mean, that's better than so many of those other medications that have some really severe side effects, too.
I'd say that for many patients, they would benefit from new PV treatments. Inadequate control of PV we see currently in terms of control of the hematocrit, with still requiring frequent phlebotomies even on medical therapy, with the risk of recurring thrombotic events, and probably the largest unmet need is adequate control of their symptoms, with in particular issues such as fatigue, itching, and other symptoms frequently not being adequately addressed by our current treatments.
I would completely agree with everything you say and point out that actually we have a very narrow range of current therapies, and also to date we've really not had an effective therapy for symptoms. So if symptoms are really what is bothering the patient and impacting on their quality of life, our current range of therapies are very poor with regard to that.
Everyone your name and what kind of cancer you have.
My name is Elias Cooper and I have chronic lymphocytic leukemia, or CLL for short, which means that I have too many white blood cells in my body and they don't go away fast enough.
How did you find out about Rick Simpson oil?
When white blood cell count got to a certain level, they started talking about chemotherapy, which scared me pretty good. So my wife started to look up alternative treatments for me, and she found the story of Brave Michaela, who's been using Rick Simpson oil to treat her leukemia successfully for a while. So I went and got my medical card and we started using the oil right away.
How soon did you see results after you started treating yourself with the oil?
My wife went on to cureyourowncancer.org and found the way how to make it and made me some, and I just started taking it every day. And after about 3.5 weeks of taking it every single day, I went back to the doctor and had blood tests, and my white blood cell count dropped about 40,000, which is amazing, for lack of a better word. It was life-changing news.
Have you tried any other treatments besides the cannabis oil?
When I went to the doctor originally and was told I had leukemia, I asked if there was anything I could do, any medicine, any treatments, any exercise, diet, anything I could do to at least push back chemotherapy, because it really sounds awful. And they told me that being healthy is good, but when it happens, and that they'll just keep watching my blood, and that's the way it goes. So I didn't ever try anything different until my white blood cell count got high enough where chemotherapy started becoming an option, and then that's when we started looking for alternative methods and found out about the oil. So it's the only thing I've ever used.
And what did your doctor say about the results after your blood test?
My doctor said that they were unusual and that we would keep checking my blood and have regular visits, but chemotherapy is not necessary as long as my blood count stays this low.
That's awesome. Do you take any other prescription drugs?
No, like I said, they told me there was nothing I could do, and I've never really liked taking medicine much anyway, so I don't take any other medication.
Now, what kind of side effects do you experience from the oil?
When I first started taking the oil, my energy level was much lower than normal, and I was tired a lot. So I had trouble getting up in the morning. luckily I work with amazing people, and I warned them in advance, and my coworkers were pretty great about being ready for that. And I did miss a few days of work here and there. There were days I was just too tired to go into work. But after about 4 or 5 weeks of being on the oil, I stopped having the energy drain and feeling so tired. And now I've been on the oil a couple months, and I take over 1 gram a day, and I feel zero effect.
So do you see chemotherapy in your future at all now?
Absolutely not. I don't see any reason why I would ever have chemotherapy. I've never seen anybody show me anything to say that chemotherapy is beneficial. As far as I understand it, chemotherapy kills your cells along with the cancer cells. So even though it pushes the cancer back and postpones the cancer attacking you, it's still killing part of you too. So the next time they have to give you chemotherapy, you're weaker because the chemotherapy burned and poisoned you and made you weaker. So eventually the chemotherapy will kill you if your own disease doesn't. So I would be open to the idea if someone could show me evidence that it's good to me, but I just have never seen anything like that. So I absolutely would not allow anybody to do that to me.
What do you want people to know about using cannabis as a medication?
Well, first, as a man who has a career and a family that are really important to him, I think that cannabis oil is a much better chance at survival, as well as just at managing your life. I think that the idea of missing work and the damage that chemo can cause, especially because, like I said, each time you get it, it can be worse, and the after side effects and so on can be worse. So I think you would get to spend more time with your family, quality time. My family and I are planning our future and our time together as if I'm going to be healthy and around for a very long time, and I think that that's pretty much the best thing you could get. As far as for children, I think the big thing for cannabis oil is that chemotherapy for kids is unbelievably cruel, and that you need to think about the fact that there's got to be an alternative, that this isn't working, and that kids going through chemo are suffering horrible. And so I just think it's important for everybody to please accept the fact that no matter what you've heard in the past or learned in the past, that cannabis is medicine, and any child you ever loved in your entire life, what do you think about what it would be like if they were going through that, and how quickly you would give them anything that would make that stop.
And you can learn more about that at www.bravemichaela.com. Thank you, Elias, for sharing, and hopefully we'll hear from you again.
Thank you very much. Peace, love, care.
Well, trial lawyers just love to get hold of a case like this next one. Eli Lilly pleading guilty to criminal conduct after skating under the radar for years. The company striking a deal to pay a record $1 billion, folks, $420 million to settle criminal and civil investigations involving the antipsychotic drug Zyprexa. Now, Douglas Kennedy has done extensive reporting on this subject. In fact, he was the first reporter to link antidepressant medications to childhood suicide and violence. His reporting led to congressional hearings into the risks of prescription drugs for children. Take a look.
Yeah, the risks are great, but that doesn't stop drug companies from trying to get children to take them. Now, one drug company is being held accountable for a practice prosecutors say it made into a science. It's dangerous for children, but they got pediatricians to prescribe it anyway.
It causes severe neurologic problems. It causes akathisia, which is shaking, and it causes diabetes.
And it's often deadly for the elderly, but they got nursing homes to hand it out like candy.
It causes them to suffer severe heart attacks, strokes, and it can cause them to die.
Now, drug maker Eli Lilly will pay $1.4 billion, the biggest fine in the history of the Justice Department, for marketing its antipsychotic drug Zyprexa to children and the elderly. even though there's no proven benefit to either population.
There is only a tiny proportion of the population that the drug is approved to use, and that's people with schizophrenia and a very tiny percentage of a very serious bipolar type disorder.
Stephen Schaller is a civil attorney who participated in the case with a U.S. Attorney's Office in eastern Pennsylvania, and he describes Lilly's marketing machine for so-called off-label use.
They were encouraging general practitioners and just the ordinary doctor that they can use it for, frankly, almost any form of anxiety, depression, or problem.
The government alleges Lilly promoted Zyprexa for rowdy children in schools and unruly adults in nursing homes as a sort of chemical restraint. According to prosecutors, one sales slogan was 5 at 5. Meaning 5 milligrams of Zyprexa at 5 p.m. will put even the most hostile person in compliance for the night. And even though the drug causes obesity in children and can kill elderly patients, its use in both groups soared over the past 5 years. A tribute, Scheller says, to the drug company's deceptive marketing.
In terms of the drug industry, marketing and greed for money has consumed their desire to protect public health. They are no longer just in the business of providing drugs for people who need them. They are interested in making money. Greed has overcome their better judgment.
It may have overcome their better judgment, but it did pay off. Since 1996, Zyprexa has been one of the biggest selling drugs in the world, bringing in over $36 billion. Which to some may make that $1.4 billion fine seem like a traffic ticket. That's it from here. Back to you.
Quite a story. Douglas Kennedy reporting. And we have a lot more ahead for you.
In terms of efficacy of marijuana in treating PTSD, we have numerous anecdotal reports from our combat vets and even from other first responders like police and fire talking about how valuable cannabis has been in managing their symptoms. My name is Sue Sisley, and I am on faculty at the University of Arizona, where I practice internal medicine and psychiatry, so I'm mostly doing primary care for seriously mentally ill patients. People who suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder end up on 5 or 6 different psychiatric meds, and then they're plagued with all kinds of side effects and drug interactions. The way marijuana, with its 60 or 70 different phytocannabinoids and this entourage effect, the way they all interact so elegantly with each other, the truth is that marijuana can treat the whole spectrum of PTSD symptoms with this one medication. What we find from patients is a lot of them learn how to use it more in a targeted way to manage. For instance, a lot of our PTSD patients have flashbacks at night and real trouble sleeping, and so they can simply dose marijuana in the evenings to help them decompress so that they can get some rest at night, which normally they couldn't do. And what's really the beauty of marijuana for treating PTSD is such a complex syndrome. It has so many, it's not just flashbacks and nightmares, it's also depression and anxiety and increased startle response and all kinds of this whole array of symptoms that are not easily managed by 1 or 2 medications. The proof is in the clinical response. We're seeing patients who are able to walk away from a lot of their psych meds and their opioids and simply manage their symptoms with one drug, marijuana, and that speaks volumes. Despite what the government says about marijuana having no medical value, you can't deny all these anecdotal reports. A lot of these are high-ranking veterans who hold a lot of respect and prestige in the military complex, and they're showing the courage more and more to speak openly about their experiences with marijuana. And I think that's been the most valuable thing in trying to move this issue forward. Marijuana is the only Schedule I drug that requires a second approval by NIDA even after you've already received FDA approval. NIDA is the National Institute on Drug Abuse, and they are a big federal agency that's in charge of a lot of different things, primarily curbing illicit drug abuse. And they're also charged with administering the only legal supply of marijuana in the country that's available for FDA approved studies. So NIDA has, we call it the NIDA monopoly. It's a term that we've coined to describe the situation where they have basically a government enforced monopoly on the only legal supply of marijuana. So if NIDA doesn't like your study, they can essentially derail it by never agreeing to sell you marijuana for your FDA-approved study. In our frustration with trying to overcome this NIDA monopoly, we've created this political action committee called Americans for Scientific Freedom, and I think that's a very appropriate name because we are desperate to ensure that science is never trumped by politics. We believe that, rigorous scientific studies deserve to be implemented and should never be shackled by the political environment that we're in.
Veterans are not the only people that suffer from post-traumatic stress. Victims of violent crime suffer from post-traumatic stress. Battered spouses suffer from post-traumatic stress. Significant medical issues that are sudden and life-altering, such as a CVA, can result in post-traumatic stress. One of the major criteria for the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress is intrusive thoughts, nightmares, inability to obtain restorative sleep. Many people suffering from post-traumatic stress currently are being treated by myself and other certification physicians. We cannot certify them for post-traumatic stress. We certify them for their chronic pain and many of the associated symptoms that they have with post-traumatic stress. And we get what's called a fortuitous side effect in medicine, where, okay, we can't certify you for this, but you've got something else and you'll gain benefit with this because you're treating something else. Post-traumatic stress has many things that are associated with it. It's not just a problem for an individual coming back from combat or a battered spouse. These people have higher rates of divorce. They lose their jobs because they can't function anymore and they withdraw from society. They commit suicide. 18 suicides a day was the number that I heard. That's amazing. I know that the VA is really concentrating right now on the risk of suicide in returning veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan. This has been a problem for some time. The main issue with marijuana and post-traumatic stress is the current mainstay of therapy is cognitive therapy. Basically, post-traumatic stress is people that have a stressor and they do not have the coping skills in order to deal with those stressors. They need to be taught those skills. The arguments that you will hear from the people that do not want to use medical marijuana with post-traumatic stress is that, oh, they're not in the present tense, it interferes with their cognitive therapy. Now, I'm going to be very blunt. Cognitive therapy lasts for years. And if it's a matter of going into therapy for 5 years versus 6 years, that's a small price to pay for somebody that's going to do a .44 caliber taste test because they cannot bear their life anymore. We make a big play in medicine of involving patients in their own therapeutic decisions. Cancer patients, glaucoma patients, chronic pain patients currently have the option of using medical marijuana. Not all take that option, but the option is available to them. Why are we not giving this option to patients with post-traumatic stress? The doctor and the patient are the ones that know best how this disorder is affecting this person's life. If we save one marriage or prevent one suicide and return somebody to productive society by allowing them access to medical marijuana as a diagnostic criteria without having something else that we have to kind of sneak them in on, I think that it's worth it. When I first started doing medical marijuana, a very wise physician told me what marijuana does for people. The normal state of affairs as a human being is to have an appetite. It's to be without pain. It's to be able to sleep. It's to be free of anxiety. Marijuana acts as a moderator to bring you back to that steady state. We need to be able to offer this to people with post-traumatic stress. Thank you.
It turns out that when anandamide is released in the brain, like marijuana, it affects such basic things as appetite, pain, and memory. And it plays a critical role in a sometimes underappreciated mental function, forgetting.
When I first heard that, it didn't seem adaptive to me to have a drug for forgetting. Memory, we understand, has great survival utility. You learn that that's a poisonous mushroom or that's a dangerous animal, and you stay away and you remember that. But why would forgetting be adaptive? And I asked Meshulam this question, and he said, well, tell me, do you really want to remember all the faces you saw on the subway this morning? Forgetting well is almost as important as remembering well. Forgetting is about editing. It's about taking the flood, the ocean of sense information coming at you and forgetting everything but what's important. So life is not just about accumulating new memories. Memory can cripple us too. You have soldiers returning from war zones that are traumatized by experiences that, in effect, they can't unlearn. So if you could help them unlearn that, essentially a productive kind of forgetting, either with a drug or some other kind of regime, that would be incredibly useful.
And that's exactly what Aaron Lichtman is trying to do. He's studying how mice remember and forget. First, he trains them to find an underwater platform.
The mice are natural swimmers, but they're looking for a way out. They swim all around the perimeter of the tank. They're swimming, swimming, swimming. Sometimes they bump into the platform by mistake and they climb onto it. Other times they never find it. So then at this point, he's been at it for a while, and the experimenter has to gently guide them to it or place them on the platform.
Then, Lichtman takes the platform away. A normal mouse quickly realizes the platform is gone. But a mouse whose anandamide receptors have been blocked is unable to forget.
They don't learn to give up. They keep on looking for that platform even though it's gone.
Scientists like Lichtman hope that learning how to regulate anandamide may one day lead to treatments for people who are haunted by their memories.
If they can elevate naturally occurring anandamide in humans, we might be able to have whole new therapeutic targets to treat post-traumatic stress syndrome.
By using a plant that has been around for thousands of years, we discovered a new physiological system of immense importance. We wouldn't have been able to get there if we had not looked at the plant.
These plants are constantly undergoing this revision and this re-revision in our cultural imagination, depending on what uses they're playing for us. Are they demons or are they, saviors? We see it with the apple, which went from evil to wholesome to evil. And we see it with marijuana, which also has had these periods of evil and this period of being celebrated by the counterculture.
Shalom and welcome back to Expert on the Spot. My name is Raphael Meshulam. I'm a professor of medicinal chemistry at the Hebrew University, and I'll be glad to answer the questions you have given me. Let us start with Reuven. Now, Reuven says, I'm curious if there has been any valuable scientific evidence linking marijuana use to any sort of memory loss or negative effect on brain function. And there are a few other participants that have asked the same question. Well, here the answer is not straightforward. There is definitely memory loss if somebody uses high levels of marijuana and the loss is acute. So during acute use, one can see memory loss. The memory loss differs, but apparently the memory loss is higher in those marijuana samples that contain high doses of THC and low doses of cannabidiol. Unfortunately, most marijuana samples today contain only THC and essentially no cannabidiol, if any. I understand that this is going to change, but at the moment this is the situation, and the answer is yes, there is acute memory loss during marijuana use if the amounts are high. The question is if there is also loss, not in an acute use, but over the years. And here the problem is more complicated. Normally one does not see any major changes, but if somebody uses marijuana over many years, high doses, one can certainly note certain memory changes. There is a question posed by Nava, and she asks, what are your thoughts regarding the notion that marijuana is a gateway drug to harder drugs? Is there any evidence to support or counter this claim? Well, this is not a simple question, because obviously people that use heroin or cocaine previously used marijuana. Most of them did. But then most of them also smoked tobacco. Most of them also did all kinds of other things. So is there a natural step from one to the other? The answer today, generally accepted, is no. If there is any movement from a softer drug, marijuana, to a harder drug like heroin, apparently this move is social rather than basic scientific. There is nothing in the marijuana plant or in the constituents that will lead a person to go from one drug to another. That particular movement, if you wish, is due to social conditions of various types. Probably the person that sells him the marijuana may sell him also other drugs. Sometimes he can and sometimes he cannot. So the answer is no. The next question concerns a problem put forward by Shaked Geffen. Why is it illegal to import medications into Israel that are made from marijuana? Well, this is not my specialty, but the answer is simple. Israel has signed all kinds of international agreements concerning illicit drugs, marijuana, heroin, cocaine, so on. So in order to import something, any drug that is legally illicit, then one has to go through many phases, has to get all kinds of agreements or ministries and so on. So it is not a simple drug to do that. It's a legal problem and nothing else. There is a question as follows. Does medicinal THC, the active component of marijuana, effectively cure some diseases, or is its use restricted to a natural pain reliever? Well, most drugs do not cure. Very few drugs cure. Antibiotics cure because they kill the microbes. Most drugs help with the effects of a drug, and hopefully the body itself can do something about the disease. Most cases we treat the symptoms. Sometimes we treat the disease itself. We try to kill the microbe or the cancer and so on, but most diseases are not cured by a drug. The same is true for THC. THC is well known to lower vomiting, to lower nausea due to cancer chemotherapy, to enhance appetite. We do not cure any disease here. We just treat symptoms. This is true for almost all effects of marijuana. They have to do with helping certain symptoms. It may be pain, it may be vomiting and so on. It does not cure a disease. It does not cure anything. Caroline asked, if marijuana can help with arthritis, why is it that I had more pain when I used it? How can it be used other than smoked? Well, it's strange. Mostly, marijuana reduces pain. Mostly, it reduces the inflammation. Maybe the marijuana you used did not contain any cannabidiol. Again, marijuana contains two major constituents, THC and cannabidiol. The anti-inflammatory agent, the major one, is cannabidiol. If the marijuana you used didn't have cannabidiol, then the effect was smaller or none at all. So chances are that's the marijuana you used. THC is the psychoactive component, and while it affects pain and inflammation, its effects on inflammation are lower. You ask also whether it can be used in some other way than smoking. The answer is yes. We administer pure THC in oil, in olive oil, under the tongue. The effect is not as fast as smoking marijuana, but it is more quantified. We know exactly how much we give, and we can measure the effects in this way. Phyllis asks, what are the long-term effects of medical marijuana use in teenagers? But there is no great difference. The long-term effects are more or less as the long-term effects in adults. The problem here is that teenagers are still growing. All the hormonal changes are going up and down. There are all kinds of other things, so that we cannot state explicitly the way we state with adults, well, there are essentially no major side effects, no major long-term effects. Here, I'm not so sure that the situation is exactly the same. Basically, people have not seen any major changes, any major long-term effects, but I would strongly suggest, if somebody is smoking marijuana just for the fun of it, go down or don't do it. We are not sure what the long-term effects are. The next question is by Yuval, who asks about the effects of cannabis on cancer. Well, it's a simple question. It's in a complicated answer. Compounds against cancer are first tested in vitro. That's not in an animal, but in a test tube. And cancer, many types of cancer, are really affected by THC or cannabidiol. One sees that many of the cancers are destroyed or they are less active and so on. This is in the test tube. Then the next step is, are they active in animals? And here, of course, we have many types of cancers, and the answer again is yes. In many cases, we see, when tested in animals, animals that have been inoculated with a cancer, yes, there is an effect. The effect is not always very potent, but there is an effect. And many others, have done a lot of work in this area, and we have seen different effects. They are not very, very potent compounds, but we have definitely seen effects. Unfortunately, there is just one published experiment with THC in humans, and this is against a terrible disease called glioma. It causes death in essentially 100% of the cases. It has been administered, THC, directly into the brain, and the people that did the experiments in Spain show that some of the patients died a few months later than expected. Not much, all of them died, but at least a few more months later. But this is the only one. This is strange, but actually very, very few experiments have been done in humans with THC, and I can only say I regret that, because we have in animals a long list of cancers that have been treated successfully, and this is not the case in humans, unfortunately. We normally speak of the advances of medicine and how better our medicine is than it was 30, 40, 50 years ago. Well, I beg to differ. Sometimes we are not better. Sometimes we are much worse. When insulin was discovered in the 20s, within 6 months it was used as a drug in humans, and it has saved millions of lives. When the steroids were discovered in the late 30s, early 1940s, they were almost immediately used within 2 years. Today, the picture is completely different. The endogenous cannabinoids found in our body, we call them anandamide and 2-AG, they were discovered about 15 years ago. They definitely have very positive effects in animals, in the test tube, in animals. They have never been tested in humans. Neither anandamide nor 2-AG, endogenous compounds with very positive effects, they have never been administered to a human. I don't think that this is a medical advance. Human rights. I suffer from post-trauma. I heard about recent success with regards to medical marijuana and PTSD. Can marijuana really ease my symptoms? And here the answer is definitely yes. Post-trauma is a serious disease. It's a disease of memory. People that have post-trauma do not forget the terrible thing that may have happened to them. Somebody got killed next to them, or something else happened to them. They were involved in something that caused trauma, and they do not forget it. Most people forget. Marijuana, or the whole mechanism of marijuana action, helps forget. We sometimes think that forgetfulness is a bad thing. On the contrary, we have to forget. In these cases, cases of post-trauma, people do not forget. Their cannabinoid system is not functioning as it should. So people have tried, and the effects are very positive. As a matter of fact, there has been a clinical trial, a clinical test in Canada with a compound which does the same as THC, a compound called Nabilon, and 70% of the cases, most of them soldiers who had PTSD, post-trauma, most of them, above 70% of them, could go back and slept well. Many of them said that they had never slept so well since they had post-trauma, and this we have heard also from patients that get marijuana by smoking or eating and so on. So my answer to this question is positively yes, it affects positively the ability to sleep and maybe some of the other effects of post-trauma. A question from Itai. He says, I'm 22, I've had asthma since I was 9 or 10. How much is known about the use of cannabis to treat asthma? Unfortunately, very few human experiments have been done in this area. It is known that THC affects positively asthma, presumably by several mechanisms. In addition to the anti-inflammatory effect, it's also affecting some other mechanisms within the lungs. And it is one of the most promising areas of cannabis use. Of course, I wouldn't suggest that anybody with asthma should smoke, because the actual smoking can cause an attack of asthma. But there are other ways to ingest, to get the drugs, and I'm sure that at some point, several years from now, they will be used. But at the moment, we do not have enough human data to back this, which is, again, I'm very sorry to say, it should have been done years ago. The few experiments that have been performed are very positive. Many thanks for listening and viewing our program. I hope that those of you who asked because of personal medical problems will feel better, and I hope to hear from you again.
You've heard the claims. Some people say when they had chemotherapy and the chemicals took away their appetite, nothing helped except smoking marijuana. Melissa Etheridge said when she had breast cancer, marijuana restored her appetite. The DEA says this is anecdotal nonsense, and there is no proof that marijuana works, that it's necessary. And in fact, they categorize it as a Schedule I drug, the same as heroin, which means they say it has no medical uses. Now, our next guest is Montel Williams. He's had a hugely successful talk show on TV and radio. He also has MS, multiple sclerosis, which gives him excruciating leg pain. And you say the only thing that's helped you is marijuana.
You know, it's so ridiculous when you talk about what the DEA has to say. The only studies that have been done by our government, the most recent one back in 1999, commissioned by General McCaffrey, who was one of the most staunch anti-drug people we've ever had.
He was the drug czar.
The drug czar. That study came back and said that one of the most egregious things our government has ever done was made marijuana illegal. Why? Because it is an efficacious product for pain cessation. Everybody knows that, and they've known that for quite a long time. The problem is that we never really figured out how we could distribute the product and keep control over it.
Just before we get to that, I mean, these aren't evil people in the DEA. They have to genuinely believe the study isn't very good.
See, but the problem is that they've never studied it at all. You know, most people in this country have no idea why marijuana is illegal. Most people think that this government went through a process and studied the drug and then classified it illegal because it was dangerous. Marijuana was made illegal back in 1939 by something called the Marijuana Tax Act, folks. And the reason why it was made that way is because we have people like William Randolph Hearst who wanted to go ahead and chop down trees in the Northwest and didn't want marijuana being grown because of all of its byproduct, the ability to make paper, rope, clothing, and other things. So that's been what the big problem is.
Also, I understand because black people were smoking and
correct, black people and
white
Hispanics.
People.
Matter of fact, addressed in a study that was done by, here in the state of New York back in 1944, De La Guardia commissioned the first study on marijuana's efficacy, and it came back and talked about the fact that because it was being used by Hispanics and blacks, that was part of the reason why people wanted to stop it. So let's go to the drug itself. Does it work? For some people it does. It doesn't work for everybody. 25% of people in this country.
What's it do for you?
For me, I have extreme neuropathic pain in my lower extremities, from my feet to my shins. I have pain in my side. I have something that just got diagnosed as called trigeminal neuralgia. I have pain in the center of my face. When I utilize marijuana, it takes that pain from a 4.5 to about a 2, which makes it manageable. And here's the thing, you said earlier, smoking. You don't only have to smoke marijuana. If anybody else could test it, because the U.S. government owns the patent. Most people in this audience don't know that. The United States government,
allow somebody else
that's right, owns the patent for marijuana. If they would allow other people to test it, I eat it in an edible form, I take it in a pill form, I take it in a liquid form, and I also vaporize it.
But wait a second, what about that? Marinol is the pill form. The government could say, just, you have Marinol,
no, we
that's
don't.
enough.
Marinol is a synthetic drug that's not made from real marijuana, so that's part of the problem. But in London, there's a company called GW that has a product that's called Sativex. That is similar to Marinol because it's a liquid form of marijuana. It's a sublingual spray. It's legal all over the world, folks. The rest of the world acknowledges the fact that that's something that works for pain cessation in the EU and also in Canada. The Canadian government distributes marijuana, has been doing so through a company called Canicet for the last 5 years because they understand the efficacy. Look, this is not about your child smoking a joint. I would say this, if the President of the United States himself, if Sasha or Malia were laying in a bed, writhing in pain, the President and the First Lady, if told, this little cookie will take away your child's pain, Sasha and Malia will be taking a little marijuana tonight.
But this kind of is about your child getting high, because a lot of the people in California have used the legal medical marijuana law to just find a way to smoke.
There are a lot of people in this country today who are strung out on Oxycontin, strung out on Vicodin, strung out on Percocet, strung out on a lot of other drugs that our government controls, and they're not doing a good job of controlling that. I got 22 years in the military. I put my life on the line for this country. Don't I have a right to pay my taxes and be a functioning member of the society? Do I not?